Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. It's been a while since I've completed a video on new products from Vespa. To be honest with you, it's been a little bit stale since the 2023. That was very exciting in 2023 when they came out with a redesigned GTS 300. It was a pretty substantial upgrade for the GT line, probably the most substantial upgrade they've done. You know, changing the bodywork for the new trim, the upgraded motor that started in 2020, and the new instruments, electronics, mirrors, suspension, and so on. So you can watch my prior video on that scooter. It's a pretty popular video. I have mostly positive things to say about the 2023 and newer Vespa GTS 300. For the Primavera and Sprint, that was some of my last videos. They did some slight restyling to the Sprint and Primavera along with some new colors. Kind of spaz it up a little bit. Has a new speedometer that I'm quite a big fan of on the Primavera and Sprint. That's pretty nice, has a lot extra functionality. The only thing since those videos is they have, I think it's out of Thailand, if I'm mistaken, I'm sorry, but there's a Petek edition, and I think it's a type of fabric. Looks kind of cool. It's got different patterns, mostly a decal kit, as I like to say, or a sticker kit on a Primavera. One part that was pretty cool when I saw one in actuality is they had the glove box that was hydro dip. A pretty neat process where it looks like you can print on a plastic part. Something I wish a Vespa would do in more of the products to give it a higher level of finish versus a sticker kit. But if that's your style, go for it. Cool thing about the stickers, they do remove if you don't like them. But what do they have planned for 2025? So we're here in October. Next month is the International Motorcycle Show in Milan, Italy. The ICMA show, or ICMA. Usually Piaggio and Vespa release new models at that show. And I kind of have an idea of what they have in store for us for in 2025. So it's been a little bit of a downturn on scooter sales in general. That's mostly throughout the United States and probably partly throughout the world as well. Some of the reasons, there's lots of other options now, like electric bicycles, and kind of some uncertainty in the economics and political realm around here in the United States. But for the GTS 300, ever since 2020, they came out with the HPE engine. I kind of nicknamed the 2023 the HPE2. That's my own little, our Scooter West internal code for parts that are specific to the 2023 and later GTS. Well, it looks like in 2025 and already in Europe, they already have an updated motor for the GTS 300. So the GTS 300 HPE has always had a 278cc motor. The bore is 75 millimeters. It's got a 63 millimeter stroke, so it's an over square engine, as they like to call those. So it's kind of a higher revving motor. Well, the Euro 5 standard has had some changes. They want to further quiet the motors down, and one way to do that is to lower the RPMs. They also want to have a more sophisticated onboard diagnostics. You know, the nice thing about these new Euro 5 or 2023 and newer Vespa GTS is they've gone to a more standardized electronic interface for diagnosing the scooters. Pretty much the same CAN bus and K-line interface as modern cars, the OBD2 interface, and I've covered that with the scan tool that we both sell and the connection that's under the seat. And for a new scooter owner, that's probably not something you're really concerned about, but it comes down to serviceability 5 or 10 years down the road. It may be something you're interested in versus having the prior models that have a highly proprietary interface that either needs dealer tools or some specialized tools that diagnose issues, the electronic fuel injection issues. For the most part, they're pretty trouble-free. You know, yeah, carburetor, you could like get in there and fiddle with it and tune it up, but for the most part, the fuel injection systems typically last the life of the scooter. So there's other systems around the scooter that typically will fail, or you may have a fuel pump fail, and that's pretty easy to diagnose in the fuel injection system. So let's talk about the GTS 310. So it looks like it may be out in Europe. I think it's about 200 euros more than the outgoing GTS 300. I looked at every single parts diagram. So for the most part, all the trim, all the paint colors all look the same. I think they may have one new verde or green color. There's one welcome addition that they do have is I saw they have 2 different part numbers for the switchgear. They now have them in black. A lot of people are not fans of the chrome switch gears. It does look pretty classic on this Verde Relax GTS, but if you have a black Super Tech, you kind of want everything black on it, not some glaring switch gears. So that's looks to be an improvement. Of course, the aftermarket beat Piaggio to the punch, and I have covered how to replace these switch gear pods on a 2023 and later, but it looks like they're going to finally have black switch gears. So on to the engine. So it's going to be a true 310cc engine. Still 11:1 compression ratio, just like the outgoing model. It looks like it's about 5% more horsepower. So you got the original Vespa GTS 300 HPE starting in about 2020. They're about 17.5 kilowatts at 8,250 RPMs, pretty high RPMs for the peak horsepower. Translates to about 23.5 horsepower, which is pretty good. I feel they have adequate performance. Well, the new motor is about 5% higher horsepower, about 18.4 kilowatts at 6,500 RPMs, or about 25 or 24.7 horsepower, you know, as in the standard sense. So definitely lower RPMs, that's about 11% lower RPMs. That's making its peak horsepower. The torque comes on at 5,250, the peak torque, and that's 11% more torque. And that kind of makes sense because now it's a longer stroke engine, like the crankshaft stroke is longer, and typically you can get more torque out of a long stroke engine versus over square engine where the bore and the stroke are about the same. You get higher RPMs, like in a race car, for instance. There's a lot of different theories that goes behind engine design. I'm not going to go into them in this video, but about 5% more horsepower, 11% more torque with that new 310cc engine at a lower RPMs, which is a good thing because the motor is just not going to be as stressed as much at the same speed. They've made changes to the cylinder head. It looks like obviously the crankshaft's different. The full electronic system, it looks like the same 32mm throttle body, but they have changed it to have both an upstream and a downstream O2 sensor. So what does that mean? The O2 sensor, the upstream O2 sensor, which is right off the engine, makes most of the changes to the feeling of the engine. If you change altitude or humidity, elevation, or as the engine wears, it makes changes to the feeling to give you a stoichiometric ratio when the motor's operating at like normal speeds, which happens to be the most clean operating range for the air-to-fuel ratio for an internal combustion engine, or pretty close to it. Well, they have a downstream O2 sensor, which is after the catalytic converter. And the reason they do that now is just like cars. If you remove the catalytic converter, you're going to throw a check engine light. So it essentially does a monitor of how the efficiency of that catalytic converter, and if it's out of its range and essentially polluting more, it's going to throw a check engine light as an error. It may even go into a limp mode. I don't know, but I know they have a much more sophisticated onboard diagnostic with the later generation ECU in the computer. Much more how it's with modern cars. And from a diagnostic standpoint, that's great, because if you can capture when you have issues and store it in the computer, it helps the technician diagnose an issue much easier than the more simplified fuel injection that was found on 2019 and earlier Vespa scooters that were fuel injected. So I think that's a good little positive. The downside, you're not going to be able to easily put a pipe on it unless you have the catalytic converter in there. I don't know if the 310 is going to make it to the United States. Usually it takes a whole extra year before they're homologated. Even though it's a cleaner and more efficient motor, potentially, it should meet the US standards, but there's a whole process to get that homologated to the United States. So we may not see that new 310 motor until the very end of 2025, maybe in 2026, but I don't know. But the ICMA motorcycle show coming up in November 2024, you're going to see all the new GTSs bumped up to GTS 310. And I think that's an appropriate size. I know a lot of people want to have like the BV400 in a GTS package. I can attest to modifying these GTSs, and once you make them go much faster than 85 miles an hour on the 12-inch wheels and this wheelbase, they get pretty unstable. I find the motor's perfectly adequate for this size scooter, and that's my own opinion on it. So what's your thoughts? You know, you're welcome to chime in on the comments. You can do some Google searches and find some information on the GTS 310. Not that much different than the outgoing 2024, but a little bump in the engine, which is always welcome. We'll see you on the next one. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com.